In this episode, we're going to learn about race day strategies. All right, so I'm on here with Coach Todd. Todd, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Yes, and we're very glad that you're here. And we wanted to talk to you about something called race day strategy that you are very obviously familiar with as a coach, and this being a topic that you kind of wanted to talk about. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about you, your journey, and how you ended up being a run coach.
Yeah, well, great to be here. Interesting. I have an interesting pathway to being a run coach. Probably not traditional compared to many of the other run coaches out there that probably have had real successful running careers and that were running, from early on and successful throughout their running career. I started back. You can take a look. I'm a lifter. I'm a bodybuilder. I'm a weightlifter. I started lifting at age 10. And that was my passion, just get big muscles and look good and pose in the mirror. Um, but that carried on, even through high school, I was interested in nutrition and lifting. And ultimately that led to my career, in college, exercise physiology degree, nutrition degree, and then started working at a gym as a fitness director and doing a lot of personal training and still continuing my lifting and how much can I bench press and getting big and taking all the supplements and protein. But in the gym atmosphere, we're kind of forced to teach aerobic classes and get into the aerobic part. And I looked the part, physically fit from a muscular standpoint, but really wasn't into the running, the cardiovascular type exercise, but that was part of the gig. So I was forced to get in shape, teach some classes. And then just it kind of evolved from there where, the people participating in your exercise classes, want you to do the local event, the 5K, the 10K. So I gradually got involved, in running into my 20s, but nothing too serious, to show up and run and basically the fitness that you've developed from teaching the various exercise classes. Um, and then I left the fitness career after about 14 years, got into orthopedic medical device sales, and I continued to run, more leisurely, not really seriously, but, competed, actually did a lot of races. I love the competition part of the sport. So I'd race, at least 10, 12, 15 times a year, various 5Ks, 10Ks. And and then, it just kind of evolved. From there, more interest. I actually hired a coach. That was probably about 20 years ago because I'm like, what can I want to see if I can get a little bit better. I do have some limitations physically that have challenged me over the years, or the inability to build miles, and we can get into that if you like. But so I hired a coach who made really immediate impact. And I think that's what started it all. Tom Schwartz, Tin Man, very famous coach. He's got a presence out there in the world of running, even currently. And his approach just resonated like, hey, this is, a little different than how I've been training. And and immediate, at age 39, 40, I'm PRing 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, essentially on the same miles per week. I'm like, what is, this is interesting. So I think from there, the whole run coaching, running intrigued me. Um, Back in 2017, I started to, play around, do some coaching with friends. Back in my medical device career, the people would know I run, and the receptionists and the nurses, hey, can you set me up on a program or a plan for the local half marathon? And then in 2019, I got involved in a Facebook group called I Love to Run. It's a running community, very large. I just joined the community, started chiming in, answering people's questions, giving my advice. And the owners of the site were kind of like, hey, you know your stuff. Do you want to get more involved in the site? Do you want to, write a couple articles that we can give to the new members? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I think from there, it evolved. I gave advice. I got my first one or two running clients. They said, hey, are you interested in coaching? I'm like, yeah. So that was 2019, and here we are. It's kind of just grown, basically through word of mouth. being tagged on various posts throughout social media, and to the point where beginning of 2023, I quit corporate and became a full-time run coach and smart approach training. Here we are.
Huge congratulations. I love it when anyone that loves running can kind of end up making that into their real career because that's just so beautiful, right? They always tell us you have a hobby and then you have what makes you money. But if you can somehow manage to intermix them, and I mean, kudos to you, you were able to quit your corporate job. So that's really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome. I mean, things have kind of gone full circle. Back in the day in the fitness industry, I just love the one-on-one interaction with as a personal trainer, working with all fitness levels from, a guy that's a hockey player in the junior team locally to someone who's just getting into fitness and overweight and trying to help take them along on their journey to become healthier and more fit. And it transfers over beautifully to kind of the passion that I have working with individuals, athletes one on one to essentially transform them into something that they're not currently at. So
That's awesome. Super rewarding. And you are coaching a friend of mine who's very happy with your coaching. And for that reason, this is what we're talking.
yeah.
And when we started talking, I asked you what was a topic of your choice. What is something that you feel like you are really passionate about? And so you were talking about your race strategy and how that is something we can talk about. But before we do that, let's talk about the overreaching philosophy. Every coach has a philosophy. What is yours?
Yeah, when I started my business, and even before officially starting a business, I had a mindset of, what I wanted a brand, I wanted to promote a brand, and just being out there in the marketplace, on the social media sites, you just see so much, how do I say it? Just many runners just aren't training correctly. They're not training smart. So, the bells went off and, how can we turn this into a brand? And obviously, if you ask any runner, do you want to train smarter? Well, yeah, I want to train smarter. So that's kind of how it kind of evolved into, hey, people just need to train smarter if they want to get to where they want to go. And sometimes it's not all about, Boston qualifying. And sometimes training smarter just means staying injury free, enjoying running more, and seeing where that takes you. So then I came up with the brand Smart Approach. I also have a little bit of a recovery coaching business too, Smart Approach Recovery, Smart Approach Training. And I developed an acronym for SMART, Structured Marathon Adaptive Recovery Training. And there's a meaning to each of those letters to come up with SMART. But I mean, looking at the broad scheme of things, it's about educating, getting people to run smarter, race smarter. It really carries over into all facets of run coaching. Eat smarter, feel smarter, recover smarter. I think it's just a really good fit, and I'm real happy with how it's kind of turned out as we go along.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then from your perspective, who is your ideal coaching client? Because obviously we know that not everybody trains the same way. You and I earlier talked about people that, do the heart rate approach. There's high volume approach. Who is smart approach a good fit for? Or do you vary your training depending on who the person is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the smart approach, I mean, caters to really any level of athlete. What motivates me as a coach is to develop a runner, to take a runner from wherever they're at. And some people I work with are more advanced and they need tweaking and coddling and monitoring and confidence building, and just strategies, just working on some of the smaller things to get them to go to the next level. But I'm also motivated by the newcomer in the running world. Like I said, it doesn't matter the type of athlete. But for me, the motivation is developing. That's where my passion is to take someone from here and move them up the scale, wherever that. Some people are going to move way up here. Some people it's going from here just a little bit. And that's what motivates me. So, when looking at a specific athlete, really anybody is a candidate. I have certain requirements when we do, the discovery calls, or basically the first time I meet a runner, we'll just, they'll fill out a, running questionnaire that's pretty extensive. And then we'll just have a conversation like this. And it's about, developing a connection early on because essentially they're interviewing me. And I always encourage, potential run clients to interview me and interview a couple other coaches. I want the right fit for you, and maybe that's not me. So I care enough about each runner that they find the right coach that works for them. My requirements are um, I need someone that's motivated, committed. That's a priority for me because I get less motivated if I'm getting coming through Final Surge, the app that I work with, if I see I skipped a run, I was tired, I had a headache, and that happens. But if it's happening on a regular basis, that doesn't motivate me as a coach. You're not into your craft. So I need motivation. I also need the individual runner to hear me out. This is my approach. This is what I believe in. This is probably how I'm going to work with you. So are you in? Do you trust my process? And if you trust me, then trust me and don't do things like you used to do back in the day. You're here for a transformation and let me work with you, trust me, and we're going to take you to where you want to go.
I'm sure that has got to be the most frustrating part as well, right? Because you have sometimes, I mean, I do that in my real line of work. I'm an attorney too, where you are hired to do your job, but sometimes there is resistance and it doesn't come from a bad place. It just comes from
Yeah.
from a place of a little bit of knowledge. And then that kind of is a little bit frustrating, right? Because you have to be able to trust your coach because otherwise, why did you hire your coach?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's frustration, but I expect it just about in anybody I work with because, they're essentially interviewing me or other coaches because they kind of think they're not doing things the right way, or perhaps they're constantly injured, or they've stagnated, or their fitness has gone down, or they just haven't gone anywhere. Um, they see other people, maybe their friends are growing and they're not. So I kind of expect, when I interview a prospective client, I almost I'm ready for their story. I know what it's gonna, well, I train hard, I run all my pacing is at the same pace, and it's really immediately it's like, hey, I can make impact with this athlete by just, I mean, the starting point is just polarization. Let's build structure into your plan, and it's going to make a huge difference. And a big part of that is slowing people down. It's, the biggest abuse out there in the running community is everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, many runners are just running too fast too often. It's on the I Love to Run site, you know, probably the community is like, geez, Coach T, you know, you constantly promote slow, 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 slower, easy, 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 easy. And for 95% of the runners, it applies. We're just running too fast too often. So yeah, so that's the biggest first step I take with many runners is slow them down. And sometimes it's like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. If you want me to run this pace, why am I running way slower than my 5K or 10K pace? Through education, we get them there.
Yeah, I see that on Strava too. I'm a huge proponent of running really slow on my easy and recovery runs. And then every once in a while I hop on Strava and I see a lot of people that I know are struggling with their marathon time. And I see that they do their easy run in something in the eights. And I'm
Yep.
like, that should not be theirs. But it's
Yeah.
almost like it's like we beat this topic so much that we hear it all the time, but nobody really applies it to their running, unfortunately.
Yeah. I don't, it takes some time to believe it. And again, that comes with the trust thing, and that's something I reiterate to those I work with. I'm like, just trust me. It's gonna happen. And what happens is, there's a muscle memory thing. Many runners just like, wow, when I try to run slower, it just doesn't feel right, and it's actually harder. It's like you just because you haven't done it. You just have to practice it, and it will become more natural. But the magic occurs, not in 1 week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks. So what happens is, and many of my runners that I coach now, even to this day, they're just like, I cannot believe this is who I was, the 20 to 25 mile a week runner, kind of struggling, aches and pains. Every run was kind of a grind. And now they're running 50, 60 miles a week, feeling fantastic. Coach, I ran 16 miles yesterday, and I feel this morning, I feel like it was like a 5 mile run. So that's the process of structure, polarization, keep your easy easy, mix in strategic stamina, speed work, and then it just all comes together gradually. There
Mhm.
has to be patience, and I think many runners are, I have a race in 3 weeks, I have a race in 6 weeks, 12 weeks, get me there fast, fast, fast. It's not how the body works.
Yeah, 100%. I love this. I love this. And just side note, slow running feels so good for those of you listeners that haven't tried it. Just try it. So little pressure on your body and yourself to perform. But, I think the hidden secret to that is just to not look at your Strava and just let that go.
There's a comparison game. It's all athletes are looking at their friends and competing. And also when they post on social media their runs, they don't want their friends or acquaintances to see that they ran 10 minutes or 11 minutes for an easy run. They want to say, hey, I can run 8 minute easy run. That makes me fast. And I think through, obviously education on that, I love to run site. And obviously with my runners, it's like, what's the end goal here? Is it to just impress your friends in a training run, or would you rather impress them on race day? So, you know, constant communication.
Yep, there's that social media again. Anyway, so today we're going to hop into, like we said, the race
Yeah.
day strategies, and I'm going to give you the floor for that. And hopefully, we'll hop into pacing, mental strategies,
Yeah.
race routines, and all that.
Yeah, I think, and we'll stick more with the marathon, but some of these principles apply really to all distances. But I think one of the biggest issues out there is, marathoning is so huge and it excites us to choose an event, a year from now, 6 months from now, 12 weeks from now, 16 weeks from now. And, runners get excited about being in marathon training. Coach, when do I officially start marathon training? And my philosophy is really training is 365 days a year because when you're not in official training, you're still working on developing, all facets of your fitness from fueling to nutrition, and perhaps we're working on weaknesses, or perhaps we're trying to heal the niggles or so forth. So I value 365 days out of the year, not just the 14, 16, 20 week marathon training block. But first and foremost, I think many athletes have a goal in mind or a time in mind. And first timers, obviously we encourage having a great experience finishing. Don't focus on any type of a time, just enjoy it. And then from there we build. But for those who have done, multiple marathons, it's, yeah, well, I ran a 4:30 and I want to shoot for 4 hours in my next marathon. So as a coach, um, first of all, I struggle with choosing a time. I'm going to go for this time. So as a coach, I evaluate who you are in the moment. So we're going to train based off your current fitness, not your goal or wish fitness. So I think oftentimes when runners may go find a plan online and you plug in a goal time. So maybe this 4:30 marathoner plugs in 4 hours. I think I can improve in 16 weeks. So then that training plan, probably has paces geared toward training paces to hit that 4 hour time. But this athlete is not in 4 hour shape. So they're deviating from their current fitness and training toward a level of fitness that they may not be ready for. So that's first and foremost. I try to set my athletes straight that we're not going for something that you're not capable of. We're not focused on an outcome. We're going to train based on who you are. We're going to build your fitness week to week to week. I'm going to evaluate you on a day-to-day basis, week to week basis. And then throughout the whole training block, I'm going to get a pretty good read on what your potential is. And then that's your marathon pace. Um, I kind of do things a little outside the box sometimes. For example, I don't use marathon pace in my training terminology. Never. The only time that may come up, obviously, the more experienced, marathoners who've, maybe 4 races in a row, they've ran 4:05, 4:02, 4 hours. Of course, we can say marathon pace is 9 minute pace, give or take. But, a lot of the athletes that I'm developing, they're evolving or they're not even sure where they're at. And as a coach, that's what I'm here for is to evaluate and build your fitness, and then determine what your capability is on race day. So that's the foundation of race strategy is building fitness, um, and then determining what you're capable of on race day. So that's the starting point. And then we can get into obviously as we go along, where we show up on race day, how we're gonna strategize to perform our best as well.
And I think that's a really good topic to talk about just in general on its own, because whether you are signed up with Runna, the app, or you're using Hal Higdon from online, a lot of people just have that. And then they have the one sentence that tells you, okay, this is what you do on race day. But I've seen through my friend Patty, who you're coaching, how much you put into having this race day strategy. Unfortunately, I only saw it on the day of, so we couldn't really discuss it a lot, but I thought that was really interesting. And so maybe we can talk about all these things that you put thought into for
Yep.
your runner to perform the best that they can during race day.
Yeah, so as being a marathoner, it's I think the running community and the average person just going online looking for a plan is they put so much into the plan. If I just follow this plan, I'm good to go. I'm set. I'm going to go through the training cycle, boom, I'm going to show up, kill it. So obviously the plan is important. The process is important, but um, I don't think there's enough thought process into the actual race. You show up and it's like, okay, I guess I trained for 4 hours. I'm just gonna I guess I'll just start off a 9 minute pace and see what happens. And that's where things oftentimes fall apart because you can maybe run 9 minute pace for 14 miles, 16 miles, 18. Coach, I got the mile 20 and I'm suddenly running 11 minute pace and I just crashed. I mean, I hear that constantly where the training runs went okay. I worked hard, it was tough, then I crashed. So then we look at what's the rationale or why did that happen? So whether it be with Patty or other runners, we go back and try to figure out um, why this is happening. The basic criteria of going into a marathon is being fit. Okay. If you're trying to even partake in a training plan with zero fitness and trying to expect to perform extremely well 16 weeks later, it just doesn't work that way. One of the requirements that I typically have for my athletes is, before we go through a marathon training block, I mean, I want you to be fit. You have to have some proof or fitness that you can actually get through 16, 20 weeks of training because it doesn't do either one of us any good if we're building up and you're, oh God, my knee's starting to hurt. That's not how you train. So you need to have some sense of fitness before you go into a training block where you're building, your long runs are greater, your miles are increasing, there's intensity increases. So first and foremost, we want that. But let's assume an athlete is, fit. So on race day, from a strategy standpoint, what frustrates me is to see runners, go through the training process. And for many, it's a grind. Um, I don't teach grind. I don't like that mindset. I teach, hey, we're going to work hard, but we're going to have fun. We're going to grow. We're not going to be miserable through training. This is the culture I teach is enjoyment. Let's make running part of your lifestyle, happiness, add happiness to your life. So I try to get that culture ingrained into athletes. Like we're going to make this fun versus the grind. I hate this type mentality. So um, I want the athlete to feel confident. So throughout the whole training block, we're building confidence. So then when they're lined up on race day, they're 100% confident. I'm evaluating throughout the whole process and give them a game plan. So that's where it starts. I give them a game plan depending on the level of athlete. It could be these are the paces I want you to run based on your fitness for X amount of miles the first half. And then the other part that I really bring into my coaching is the feel component. I often think this gets neglected. We're so fixated on the analytics, the numbers, and we lose track of what paces feel like. So, I teach that in my athletes in training. Like, let's go out and run 5 miles at what feels like marathon pace, or I don't call it that, what feels like steady pace. They're like, well, tell me what pace to run at. I'm like, no, this is a feel run. envision being between miles 5 and 10 in the marathon, what you want to feel like. And it should feel like cruising. You shouldn't be struggling, in miles 5 through 10 in a marathon. So you shouldn't in this training run as well. So we're developing kind of resiliency and confidence before they actually go into the race so that when they show up, they have the plan in place and they kind of know what it's going to feel like throughout. So for a marathon, and you've been there, you've probably had some, perfectly executed marathons, and you've probably had some that are like, what did I just do? Why did I go out fast and struggle? And so for me as a coach, it's about I want the athlete to have the absolute best experience possible. And that may or may not be the best time possible. I think we're also fixated on shooting for a time. And what if you show up race day and it's 75 degrees and you trained in 40s and 50s? So we need to adapt. So the week before, I'll meet with my athletes. I said, hey, Bob, um, I know what you're capable of, but on Sunday, that's not in your wheelhouse because of the heat. And you haven't done a lot of training in the heat. We're going to have to adapt and make some changes with your strategy, pacing, feel, perhaps fueling, hydration. So then it's like this athlete might say, well, no, I'm not going to hit 4 hours. What the heck? That was my goal. So what happens with the average athlete is they're still fixated on 4 hours, even with the heat. So they still just go out at that 9 minute pace. And then again, it really falls apart because they didn't take into account the heat factor. So when I'm working out a race strategy for my athletes, it's knowing what they're capable on race day in the conditions that they're running in, whether it be heat, humidity, wind, course terrain, all that factors in for the game day strategy.
I love this. I want you to keep talking. So basically, okay, when we're talking about pacing, right?
Yeah.
So we've now learned that there goes a ton of stuff into what goes into pacing before you even get to the starting line. But what are your recommendations for establishing and sticking to a race pace? How do you figure out what such race pace should be? And we can stick with the 4 hour marathon or 9 minute miler.
Yeah. So throughout the training process, I'm focusing on building fitness. And what I do in the athletes that I coach is I'm always evaluating. So I have what's called indicator workouts or races. So on any given day, I may give them a workout that, at least in my mind, is like I want to test their fitness at certain paces. Um, and then get their feedback on that because I'm tying in pacing with effort. And I use various efforts in my training. Typically, there's recovery, there's easy, there's some challenge, semi-hard, hard. It's kind of my little block of terms. And and actually there's actually one more term, cruising. Cruising is what I often use because I want marathon pace to be cruising. And cruising is kind of like, hey, I'm out here running, I'm cruising, I'm enjoying things. At no point do I feel like I'm in, digging or blowing. At some point in a race, that may factor in. But so I'm trying to get feedback in these indicator workouts of, hey, I may say, hey, go do, 8:30 pace for 2 by 3 miles. What did that feel like? If they're like, oh man, I was dying. And I'll look at the weather. But if they say, hey, 8:30 pace, I felt pretty good. That was, some challenge, not bad. That tells me that, okay, 9 minute pace is going to probably feel easier. Maybe they're evolving from 2 months ago. Um, and I focus on paces that I don't do a lot of steady, essentially I call marathon pace steady in my terminology. In the early phases of the marathon training block, my focus is on building fitness versus locking into that quote marathon pace or steady pace because I feel you get more bang for your buck physiologically. The goal is to build fitness, not just work at a pace that's, marathon pace is kind of in that gray zone. It's too hard to be easy, too easy to be hard. So I don't think that pace is the best for developing the physiology of building fitness. So I don't target that pace until a little bit later in the training block, especially with athletes that are a little less experienced, because you do have to develop muscle memory. My more experienced athletes, I don't do a whole lot of marathon pace because they're experienced pacers. They know what it feels like. I'd rather just keep working on building fitness, doing the stamina work, the critical velocity, the threshold work, and not slowing down to the marathon pace. We do lock into it later on, but so yeah, so it's about developing fitness first. Indicator workouts. I love throwing in some races of half marathon race sometime in the training block. What 6 weeks before, 4 weeks before. That's a good indicator workout that tells me a lot. Um, 5Ks and 10Ks are also very valuable. Um, 5Ks and 10Ks. I mean, I love a 5K race. My athletes know it's my favorite distance. They kind of make fun of me because it's like, why? It's a waste of time to show up to to do 3 miles. And I disagree. I think a 5K has a lot of value. But yeah, indicator workouts, racing to help me determine what they're capable of on race day.
Perfect. Okay, so then you as a coach, you sit on the other side, you get the uploaded data, and then like you mentioned, obviously you're going to see the heart rate, you're going to see whether or not that person hit those paces at all. And then you have perception of effort by this athletes. How much weight do you give that? Also taking into consideration that some athletes that are newer probably are not as tough as, say, an ultra runner.
Yeah, I mean, I try to, as a coach, when I develop a connection with an athlete, and I think this is very important, I think there's a lot of great coaches out there, but I think there are also coaches out there that stick to, hey, here's your plan. Let me know if you have questions. That type of, because I hear it when I interview. It's like, well, my coach kind of gave me this and always said, if you have questions, let me know. And I don't think there's a healthy communication in some instances. So I try to get in the head of my athletes. What are they feeling? You get to know them over a period of, days, weeks, months, years. You know, how tough are they? Because all that factors into how you can perform on race day. I don't, I'm kind of a common sense coach. I look at analytics as a tool versus relying on them. I don't coach by zones. I don't coach by heart rates. I'm, kind of pace effort coach because we get obsessed with, got to slow down, got to speed up. Oh, my heart rate's too high. My heart rate's too low. That takes away a lot of the fun out of training, in my opinion. Now, maybe if you're an elite or the advanced of the advanced, we dig into the numbers a little bit more because that makes more sense. But you know, I coach, and most of the market out there, 95% plus, are people trying to get better and don't need to be so locked into these numbers. Oh, I ran up the hill. I got to slow down my heart. No, I focus more on feel, more on effort. So on race day, dealing with each individual athlete, there are situations on a race day strategy where I don't even put down paces at all. I said, we're going to run this race by feel. This is what I want you to feel from this mile to this mile. This is what I want you to feel here. And then get them ready for, okay, when you hit mile 18, that cruising pace is going to change. It just is. Physiologically, you're dehydrating, your glycogen is depleting, your body temperature is up. I said at some point we have to go from cruising and challenging to now we have to show up and bring it. Race time starts at 18, mile 20. Then we have to go to a different place mentally. So I prepare them for the mental game, and I want them confident going into the event. And then you show up and you bring it. It's race day. You're all in. You have to understand that. Do all the right things. We talk about the process of training and doing all the right things in training. That has to carry over to race day because why'd you train? You train to maximize your performance on race day. And I think that gets neglected too often. I think we're so focused on the plan and some people blow it on race day. It's all this time and effort going into training to perform on the big day and we just kind of show up and go for it when we may not be capable of going for it. So,
Yeah, that's a sad reality with the marathon, right? Because you spend so many months training for this one single event, and then afterwards, it's not like you can run one the next week unless you dropped out of the race.
Yeah, it's just so much more rewarding and feels so much better when you can finish a marathon on your terms with control. I tell my athletes quite often, when you get to mile 20, I want you to be the boss. You are in control of the next 6.2 miles. What the foolishness that you may have done the first half of the marathon, you don't want that to control what's going to happen the last 6.2 miles. So don't be foolish. You know, pace smarter, race smarter, put yourself in a position so that the next 6 to 8 miles, you go for your best time. This is when you go for it. Put yourself in a position to go for it late, not from mile one, two, three, four, and then you get to mile 13 and you're blowing and your pace starts slowing, and then you're in survival mode. You get to the finish line. You feel accomplished at the finish because I finished, but God, I wish I would have felt better.
Yeah, and I
So,
mean that's again another sad reality about training for a marathon because I don't know how far you have your athletes run in their longest training runs, but a lot of the prep ends at 18-20 just to avoid injury and,
yeah.
recovery.
Yeah, again, if you're following a plan, the old got to do my 20 miler, got to do my 22 miler. And um, I've had athletes PR with a max 13-mile long run. I had a lady in Chicago last year because of knee issues. I think we maxed out 11 miles. She PR'd from her last marathon where she went through a full training block doing a 20 miler, but she didn't race it correctly because she went out too fast, crashed, slowed down. She maxed out 11, 20 mile, 11 or 12 mile long run, but I had her doing a walk run strategy, in control, proper fueling. She held pace beautifully throughout. Negative split, PR'd with 11-mile max long run. So um, that's a testament of going in with a good run strategy or a race strategy based on the fitness that you're in, not where you want to be. I think for her, without a coach, she probably would have looked at that last strategy and it's like, well, I'm going to go for it and see what happens, and probably would have had a similar result. So. But yeah, I'm not, there's no set. You don't have to do a 20 miler. You don't have to do a 22 miler. Um, it depends on the level, the fitness level of the person. I'm any long run more than 2.5 hours really doesn't give you any more physiological benefit. Um, 3 hours, yeah, I'm okay with depending on the athlete. But to go out and run 4 or 5 hour long runs, I mean, it's completely ridiculous. I mean, that athlete is going to, in most cases, going to be broken down going into the run, and they're not gaining anything physiologically other than more breakdown, more metabolic breakdown, and just not how I teach. There are some athletes, some coaches that do believe in doing the 4 or 5 hour long runs, and that's okay. It's just not where I come from with the physiology and my exercise physiology background and knowing how the body reacts to stress. And I'm a recovery-based coach. Recovery takes priority. I'd rather you walk than push through soreness because you can't build fitness when you're beat down. So recovery always has to be a focus.
That's awesome. Yeah, and obviously, the even the fastest athletes do the negative splits by going out conservative. I was talking to the winner of the Boston Marathon, John Career, and I asked him because he had told me before the race he was gonna just cruise until 20, and then you saw, if anyone's
Yeah,
watched the Boston Marathon, the last 6 miles, his splits were amazingly fast. So I asked him, I said, you were running with this pack of people going fast and dying off. So did that feel like you're going easier and kind of like a cruise for you? And he said, yes, it was. He was at that level of fitness where it did feel like he was okay and he was ready to really run hard after mile 20, which, just goes
yeah,
to show a lot of times, definitely including myself, I positive split more marathons than a negative split just
yeah,
because you're impatient with yourself
yeah,
and you think, okay, I'm just gonna run as fast as I can and then hang on for dear life. And you can still do okay with it, but like you said,
yeah.
it kind of the experience goes down.
Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from, obviously we can't relate, from the talent level of the elite athletes, but we can learn from their race strategy. You know, are they performing their best if they fly out of the gate and slowly, no, they're going to fall off and finish back of the pack. So, oftentimes you'll hear the commentators say, "Oh, they're just out there warming up these first 2, 3 miles." Now, granted, they're running still 5 minute pace, but we can't relate like, well, that's not a warm up. I can't even sprint that. That's where the disconnect is sometimes, where they look like they're running fast, but physiologically, they're not. They're in, complete cruise control. And then at the halfway point, watch them. Do they look like they're blowing and struggling and grimacing? It's like, no, if they're not, why should we be struggling at mile 13? And even if they were struggling at mile 13, they have the, the huge base of fitness to slow down a little bit and still be able to finish strong and do well. Us mortals don't have that capability of cranking it for 13 and then I'm going to slow down a mile and just finish. It's like, no, the damage is already done. So that's why there has to be more time on race strategy and preparing and planning and dialing that in. And obviously that's what a coach is for. When you're doing it on your own, unless you're really in tune with your body and learn from your mistakes, and it's a challenge. It really is. And I think that's what keeps me in business. I think we struggle out there to figure it out. And I'm here to help you figure it out.
No, very true. And I guess, you obviously wear more than one hat because the two things we have not talked about yet, besides pacing, is one, fueling, and the other one is, we've touched on it a little bit, mental toughness. So, as a coach, just strictly speaking about race day, I know you probably have your athletes prepare for both of these. How do you make sure everything goes well for them, or what do you put in their pacing plan?
From a fueling standpoint,
Yes.
yeah, interesting because I do Smart Academy Zoom calls for my team. And the one I just did last Thursday evening and yesterday morning was on race day fueling. That was the topic, how to, fuel your best, how to come up with a game plan that's customized for you as an athlete. And it doesn't happen in, one marathon. Oftentimes it's a process of experimenting and learning as you go along. And so each individual athlete is unique. Fundamentally, we have to emphasize the importance of fueling. I think the majority of marathoners are under fueling, under hydrating when they show up, or they just say, I felt fine in training, so I'll just take a gel here and there and or drink when I'm thirsty and that's part of the issue at mile 18, mile 20, mile 22 is improper planning. I'm just so huge on planning and practicing. So it is customized for each individual athlete. Um, when we talk about analytics, and I'm sure you've had nutritionists and dietitians on, and there are certain formulas to follow, and like I said, I'm a little bit more common sense in my approach. For example, the carb loading, it's like ungodly amounts. If you follow the formulas, and it's like I'm not going to ask my 190-pound man to eat 800 grams of carbs for 3 straight days. Um, or race morning. It's like, oh, consume, 1,600 calories and 200 grams of carbs the morning of. And some of this based on potentially science, has some proven benefits, but common sense says, hey, I'm probably not going there with my athletes, and my athletes aren't probably receptive to that. However, doesn't mean we can't take strides or make improvements from race to race and to maybe strive to maybe get to those levels at some point. So I focus on improvement, and we can use even Patty as an example. Patty, who doesn't fuel when she wakes up and does a marathon, she showed up at London, and I had her on a specific fueling plan in the morning of and throughout the race, and boom, major, progress over her last marathons. She didn't have any fitness improvements in the 6 weeks I was working with her. It was performance improvement based on a fueling plan that worked for her and kept her fueled in addition to the pacing. So Each individual athlete is different. We work with, the different gels and formulas out there. And part of the call was educating on what is in gels and, glucose, fructose ratios and some of the other ingredients and how caffeine plays into it. And, consuming fluids and salt. I'm big on salting and salt loading. That could be a topic for another day. And again, part of my approach in general, doing things a little bit outside the box. Don't hear coaches talk about salt loading often. I do with my athletes. I am careful to promote it on social media because of the stigma around salt and how bad it is for you and bloats you and so forth, so forth. But that's insider info with my athletes. But yeah, we come up with a game plan for, carb intake, hydration, and salt, and used on a regular basis, throughout the race and being consistent with it. And you also have to practice it in training. You have to. That's part of showing up race day, being confident in your strategy, your pacing, and your fueling.
I love this. I love this, love this. So I guess my last question is going to be about teaching or making sure your athletes, as you've mentioned, show up at the starting line confident, but with the mental game that they need to
Yep.
have.
Yeah, I mean, part of the mental game is obviously you want to show up confident. I think most runners and racers, there's the anticipation of race day and there's nerves. Even throughout the whole training block, you're kind of nervous and anticipating the race day. And then obviously as it gets closer, you know, the butterflies and the nerves start creeping in. And I think there's a fear, there's excitement, there's anticipation, there's fear. And I think that the greatest fear is showing up and you know, crashing. I think there's a fear of failure. I think that's a big part of it, in addition to just being around the crowds and fun. But um, the mental game is huge. I think through training, I want an athlete, we'll have a healthy connection and they'll get a sense of what their potential is just through the paces that I give them in training and how I encourage them. And we'll talk depending on the athlete, what they're looking at. And I may tame them from their goals and educate them as to, what we're trying to accomplish from a performance standpoint, not necessarily from a time standpoint. So lining up on race day, definitely you want to be confident and I kind of encourage that throughout the whole training block. We're hitting paces, they're feeling confident. I said, good job. You did great at this pace. Do you feel like you could hold that pace for 5 miles? Do you feel like if you had to hold that for 10? And I'm just getting this feedback and I want them to show up, when we meet the week before, I'll give them the game plan and I'll flat out ask them, how do you feel about this? Feel like you're in? You feel like you can accomplish this? Can you handle this fueling strategy, this hydration salting strategy? Do these paces feel in line with what you're comfortable with? And they're like, yeah. So lining up, I want them, I always kid them. I said, when you're lined up at the start line, I want you to grunt. Give me some grunts and say, hey, I'm badass. I got this. And then it's go time.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Todd. There's so much more, and hopefully, we're gonna be able to get you on future episodes about other specific training topics. But this
Yeah.
was really great, and I want you to let the listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Run Coach Todd, on Facebook, Smart Approach Training, and then I also do have a website, smartapproachtraining.com. You can reach me really any of those three areas. And yeah, if any questions or feedback or comments after today, I'm happy to, I love chatting about running and all topics related to running. It's kind of how I'm wired, how my passion. And so, yeah, I look forward to hearing from some of you and excited to keep this journey moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great to be here. Thanks.